Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 1 through chapter 6, verse 25. Then Moses called all the people of Israel together and said to them, "Listen, Israel, to the statutes and ordinances that I am about to deliver to you today. Learn them and be careful to keep them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. He did not make this covenant with our ancestors, but with us, we who are here today, all of us living now. The Lord spoke face to face with you at the mountain from the middle of the fire. I was standing between the Lord and you at that time to reveal to you the message of the Lord, because you were afraid of the fire and would not go up on the mountain. He said, I am the Lord your God, he who brought you from the land of Egypt, from the place of slavery. You must not have any other gods besides me. You must not make for yourself an image of anything in heaven above, on earth below, or in the waters beneath. You must not worship or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. I punish the sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons for the sin of the fathers who reject me. But I show covenant faithfulness to the thousands who choose me and keep my commandments. You must not make use of the name of the Lord your God for worthless purposes, for the Lord will not exonerate anyone who abuses his name that way. Be careful to observe the Sabbath day, just as the Lord your God has commanded you. You are to work and do all your tasks in 6 days, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. On that day you must not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your male slave, your female slave, your ox, your donkey, any other animal, or the foreigner who lives with you, so that your male and female slaves, like yourself, may have rest. Recall that you were slaves in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there by strength and power. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Honor your father and your mother, just as the Lord your God has commanded you to do, so that your days may be extended, and that it may go well with you in the land that he is about to give you. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not offer false testimony against another. You must not desire another man's wife, nor should you crave his house, his field, his male and female servants, his ox, his donkey, or anything else he owns. The Lord said these things to your entire assembly at the mountain, from the middle of the fire, the cloud, and the darkness with a loud voice, and that was all he said. Then he inscribed the words on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. Then when you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness, while the mountain was ablaze, all your tribal leaders and elders approached me. You said, The Lord our God has shown us his great glory, and we have heard him speak from the middle of the fire. It is now clear to us that God can speak to human beings and they can keep on living. But now, why should we die? Because this intense fire will consume us. If we keep hearing the voice of the Lord our God, we will die. Who is there from the entire human race who has heard the voice of the living God speaking from the middle of the fire as we have and has lived? You go near so that you can hear everything the Lord our God is saying, and then you can tell us whatever he says to you. Then we will pay attention and do it. When the Lord heard you speaking to me, he said to me, I have heard what these people have said to you. They have spoken well. If only it would really be their desire to fear me and obey all my commandments in the future, so that it may go well with them and their descendants forever. Go and tell them, return to your tents. But as for you, remain here with me, so I can declare to you all the commandments, statutes, and ordinances that you are to teach them, so that they can carry them out in the land I am about to give them. Be careful, therefore, to do exactly what the Lord your God has commanded you. Do not turn right or left. Walk just as he has commanded you, so that you may live, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land you are going to possess. Now, these are the commandments, statutes, and ordinances that the Lord your God instructed me to teach you, so that you may carry them out in the land where you are headed, and that you may so revere the Lord your God, that you will keep all his statutes and commandments that I am giving you, your children, and your grandchildren, all your lives, to prolong your days. Pay attention, Israel, and be careful to do this, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in number, as the Lord, God of your ancestors, said to you, You will have a land flowing with milk and honey. Listen, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You must love the Lord your God with your whole mind, your whole being, and all your strength. These words I am commanding you today must be kept in mind, and you must teach them to your children, and speak of them as you sit in your house, as you walk along the road, as you lie down, and as you get up. You should tie them as a reminder on your forearm, and fasten them as symbols on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorframes of your houses and gates. Then, when the Lord your God brings you to the land he promised your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you, a land with large, fine cities you did not build, houses filled with choice things you did not accumulate, hewn-out cisterns you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant, and you eat your fill, be careful not to forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, that place of slavery. You must revere the Lord your God, serve him, and take oaths using only his name. You must not go after other gods, those of the surrounding peoples. For the Lord your God, who is present among you, is a jealous God, and his anger will erupt against you and remove you from the land. You must not put the Lord your God to the test as you did at Massah. Keep his commandments very carefully, as well as the stipulations and statutes he commanded you to observe. Do whatever is proper and good before the Lord, so that it may go well with you, and that you may enter and occupy the good land that he promised to your ancestors, and that you may drive out all your enemies, just as the Lord said. When your children ask you later on, what are the stipulations, statutes, and ordinances that the Lord our God commanded you, you must say to them, We were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt in a powerful way. And he brought signs and great devastating wonders on Egypt, on Pharaoh, and on his whole family before our very eyes. He delivered us from there so that he could give us the land he had promised our ancestors. The Lord commanded us to obey all these statutes and to revere him, so that it may always go well for us, and he may preserve us as he has to this day. We will be innocent if we carefully keep all these commandments before the Lord our God, just as he demands. Yeah. So Moses is continuing here, talking about the Ten Commandments, how the people acted at Horeb, that is, I believe, Mount Sinai, where you had God speaking to the congregation from the midst of the blazing fire and thundering of the mountain by the Lord. And his commandments there, namely the Ten Commandments. And then subsequent to that, Moses' intercession, that is, that the people didn't want to hear the voice of the Lord, but rather have an intercessor to go between them, which I think is a picture of Jesus' intercession for us. And then you have the Shema here in chapter 6. Listen, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, from the NET, which I think in Hebrew is that Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Elohinu, Yehovah Echad, which an interesting point about that is the oneness at the end of that echad is the same type of oneness that the man and the woman are in Genesis. That is, the two shall become one flesh. That is, echad, flesh. It's not the absolute oneness that is entailed by, I think, the other Hebrew word for it, which is yachid, but a composite oneness. So, very interesting. Yeah, and Israel is admonished again to follow what God has commanded, so it will go well with them. And if they follow all of the commandments, then they will be innocent before the Lord. Spoiler, they don't. They're violating them right out of the gate. Let's see here. Hear, O Israel. Israel was bound to the covenant they agreed to in Exodus 24, 1-8. Yet the covenant was made with the previous generation, which perished in the wilderness. The present generation had to understand and embrace the covenant if they were to enjoy the blessings of the covenant. They made a covenant, that is, literally, cut a covenant. The idea of cutting is associated with covenant because covenants were always sealed with sacrifice, the cutting of a sacrificial victim. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us. In fact, the covenant was originally made with the previous generation, and Moses did not deny this, but he drove the point home. This was their covenant. It is a covenant of the living, not of the dead. The Lord talked with you face to face. This demonstrates that the term face to face does not mean literal face to literal face, but is a Hebraic figure of speech meaning intimate, free communication. Deuteronomy 4:12 specifically says that Israel saw no form, you only heard a voice. Yet they had a remarkably transparent communication with God, so the figure of speech face to face applies. This is why Exodus 33:11 says, So the Lord spoke to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And in Exodus 33:20, the Lord says, You cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. The use of face to face in Exodus 33:11 is a figure of speech, meaning Moses had free and unhindered communication with the Lord. Face to face seems to mean in person, that is, the immediacy of personal contact. I stood between the Lord and you at that time. Israel could not bear such free and unhindered communication with the Lord, so they asked Moses to speak to God on their behalf. I am the Lord your God. Before God commanded anything of man, he declared who he was and what he did for Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. The foundation was clear. Because of whom God was and what he did for his people, he has the right to tell us what to do, and we have the obligation to obey him. You shall have no other gods before me. The first commandment logically flows from understanding who God is and what he has done for us. Nothing is to come before God, and he is the only God we worship and serve. In the days of ancient Israel, there was great temptation to worship the gods of materialism, Baal, the god of wealth and financial success, and sex, Ashtaroth, the goddess of sex, romance, and reproduction, or any number of other local deities. We are tempted to worship the same gods, but without the old-fashioned names and images. No other gods before me. This did not imply that it was permissible to have other gods as long as they lined up behind the true God. Instead, the idea is that there are to be no other gods before the sight of the true God in our life. Before me is literally to my face. This means God demands to be more than added to our lives. We don't just add Jesus to this life we already have, we must give him all our lives. Failure to obey this commandment is called idolatry. We are to flee idolatry. Those lives marked by habitual idolatry will not inherit the kingdom of God. Idolatry is a work of the flesh, which marks our old life instead of the new, and we are not to associate with those who call themselves Christians, who are idolaters. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. The second commandment prohibited not only idolatry regarding false gods, it also dealt with making an image of any created thing which we might worship. The second commandment didn't forbid making an image of something for artistic purposes. God himself commanded Israel, make images of cherubim. It forbade the making of images as an aid to worship. From Clark here. To countenance its image worship, the Roman Catholic Church has left the whole of this second commandment out of the Decalogue, and thus lost one whole commandment out of the 10. But to keep up the number, they have divided the 10th into 2. John 4:24 explains the rationale behind the second commandment. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The use of images and other material things as a focus or help to worship denies who God is and how we must worship him, that is, in spirit and truth. Paul reminds us of the futility of trying to make God into our own image. Professing to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. How can it be said that God is a jealous God? God's jealousy is love in action. He refuses to share the human heart with any rival, not because he is selfish and wants us all for himself, but because he knows that upon that loyalty to him depends our very moral life. God is not jealous of us, he is jealous for us. Yeah. It's the kind of jealousy, I think, that a parent has for their child, wanting the best for their lives, not for them to engage in self-destructive habits, but that they would listen to them so that they might preserve their lives. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. This does not mean God punishes us directly for the sins of our ancestors. The important words are of those who hate me. If the descendants love God, they will not have the iniquity of the fathers visited on them. This necessarily implies, if the children walk in the steps of their fathers, for no man can be condemned by divine justice for a crime of which he was never guilty. From Clark. Yet, the focus here is on idolatry, and this refers to judgment on a national scale. Nations that forsake the Lord will be judged, and that judgment will have effects throughout generations. Yeah. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. We can break the third commandment through profanity, using the name of God in blasphemy and cursing, frivolity, using the name of God in a superficial, stupid way, and hypocrisy, claiming the name of God but acting in a way that disgraces him. Jesus communicated the idea of this command in the disciples' prayer, when he taught us to have a regard for the holiness of God's name. Hallowed be your name. For the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. The strength of this command has led to strange traditions among the Jewish people. Some go to extreme lengths in attempting to fulfill this command, refusing to even write out the name of God, in the fear that the paper might be destroyed and the name of God be written in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This was a day of rest for all Israel, servants and slaves, as well as visitors. This is an important principle that might be too easily passed over. Here, God declared the essential humanity and dignity of women, slaves, and strangers, and said they had the same right to a day of rest as the free Israeli man. This was certainly a radical concept in the ancient world. In fact, in Moses' exposition of the law here in Deuteronomy, he pays special stress on the fact that the Sabbath is for the foreign-born slaves among Israel. And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. To keep it holy, in their traditions, the Jewish people came to carefully quantify what they thought could and could not be done on the Sabbath day in order to keep it holy. For example, in Luke 6, 1-2, in the middle of the Jewish leaders, the disciples were guilty of 4 violations of the Sabbath every time they took a bite of grain out in the field, because they reaped, threshed, winnowed, and prepared food. Yeah. And I've heard recently things like breaking an electrical current are examples of doing work on the Sabbath. So you can't even call anybody on a Sabbath day. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth. God established the pattern for the Sabbath at the time of creation, when he rested from his works on the seventh day. God made the seventh day a day of rest from all our works. But the most important purpose of the Sabbath was to serve as a shadow of the rest we have in Jesus. Some claim that Christians are required to keep the Sabbath day, but the New Testament makes it clear that Christians are not under obligation to observe a Sabbath day. From Colossians 2:16 through 17, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of any holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ." And also Galatians 4:9 through 11, "But now after that you have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn you again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto you desire again to be in bondage? You observe days and months and times and years. I am afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain." Yeah, and the church in Galatia was weighing themselves down with the claims of the Judaizers. That is, claims that you have to follow the law in order to be saved by God. And as such, were observing days and festivals and months and times and years. Jesus fulfilled the purpose and plan of the Sabbath for us and in us. However, though we are free from the legal obligation of the Sabbath, we dare not ignore the importance of a day of rest. God has built us so that we need one. Like a car that needs regular maintenance, we need regular rest, or we will not wear well. Some people are like high-mileage cars that haven't been maintained well, and it shows. But we are also commanded to work 6 days. He who idles his time away in the 6 days is equally culpable in the sight of God as he who works on the seventh. Many Christians should give more leisure time to the work of the Lord. Every Christian should have a deliberate way to serve God and advance the kingdom of Jesus Christ. Honor your father and mother. Honor for fathers and mothers is an essential building block for the stability and health of all society. If the younger generations are constantly at war with older generations, the foundations of society will be destroyed. You shall not murder. Some wonder how God can approve both capital punishment and this prohibition of murder. The simple answer is that in Hebrew, as well as English, there is a distinction between to kill and to murder. As opposed to killing, murder is the taking of life without legal justification, that is, execution after due process, or moral justification, killing in defense. You shall not murder. Jesus carefully explained the heart of this commandment. He showed that it also prohibits us from hating someone else, because we can wish someone dead in our hearts, yet never have the courage to commit the deed. Someone may not kill from a lack of courage or initiative, though his or her heart is filled with hatred. Yeah. And some of us may not have the ability to do so, but have hearts full of murder. This too is sin in the eyes of God. You shall not commit adultery. Clearly, the act itself is condemned. God allows no justification for the ways that many often seek to justify extramarital sex. It is not to be done. And when it is done, it is sin and it causes damage. Because there are different punishments for adultery and the seduction of a virgin woman, adultery is distinguished from premarital sex in the Old Testament. Each is wrong, but wrong in different ways. Merrill explains why there is not specific mention of other sexual sins in the Ten Commandments. Elsewhere, such matters as fornication, prostitution, and homosexuality receive attention and are soundly condemned. Adultery, however, implies unfaithfulness, covenant breaking, and so is an apt analog to covenant infidelity on a higher plane, the divine human. The New Testament clearly condemns adultery. Now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness. The act is condemned, but not only the act itself. More than the act itself, Jesus carefully explained the heart of this commandment. It prohibits us from looking at a woman to lust for her, where we commit adultery in our heart or mind, yet may not have the courage or opportunity to do the act. We aren't innocent just because we don't have the opportunity to sin the way we really want to. You shall not steal. This command is another important foundation for human society, establishing the right to personal property. Because you can't steal if you don't own anything. God has clearly entrusted certain possessions to certain individuals, and other people or states are not permitted to take that property without due process of law. We can also steal from God, of course. This demands we honor God with our financial resources, so we are not guilty of robbing Him. But we can also rob God by refusing to give Him ourselves for obedience and His service, because He bought us and owns us. Ephesians 4:28 gives the solution to stealing. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give to him who has need. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. We can break the 9th commandment through slander, tale-bearing, creating false impressions, by silence, by questioning the motives behind someone's actions, or even by flattery. What about inappropriate silence? When someone utters a falsity about another and a third person is present, who knows that statement to be untrue, but for reasons of fear or being disliked remains quiet, that third person is as guilty of breaking this law as if he had told a lie. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. All the first 9 commands focus more on things we do. The 10th deals straight with the heart and its desires. Literally, the word for covet here means to pant after. Covetousness works like this. The eyes look upon an object, the mind admires it, the will goes over to it, and the body moves in to possess it. Just because you have not taken the final step does not mean you are not in the process of coveting right now. Covetousness can be expressed as towards all sorts of things. It is the itch to have and to possess what someone else has. It speaks of a dissatisfaction with what we have and a jealousy towards those who have something better. Let's see here. Tell us all that the Lord our God says to you, and we will hear and do it. Israel was far too confident in their ability to keep the law of God. Their experience at Mount Sinai convinced them of God's glory, but not of their own corruption and inability. Yeah, this was the generation that shortly after disobeyed God's commands, stealing from him his right to give them orders and them do it, and refused to go into the promised land. They are right in all that they have spoken. God was pleased with Israel's response. Their response was evidence that they took him seriously. Oh, that they had such a heart. The feeling is that God liked what he saw in Israel, but hoped, to use a figure of speech, because God doesn't hope for things the way we do, that they would keep the same attitude of heart. In fact, Israel did not keep this heart. Not 40 days later, they danced in worship around a golden calf. That it might be well with them and their children forever. This is God's motive in calling for our obedience, that it might be well with us. Every command of God is rooted in love for us, not some obsessive desire for control or mean-spirited attitude toward us. Therefore you shall be careful to do as the Lord your God has commanded you, knowing the glory of God, as revealed at Mount Sinai, and the love of God, as revealed by his longing that it might be well with them, gave them all the more reason to obey God. When we have trouble obeying God, we are clearly lacking in one or both of these areas. Either we forget his glory, or we forget his love for us, or we forget both of them. Yeah. You shall teach them to your children, in chapter 6. This great command must be first in our heart, then it must be communicated to our children, the topic of our conversation, and should always be in front of us, as near as our hand or our forehead, as ever before us as our doorposts and gates. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand. By the time of Jesus, the Jewish people based the practice of wearing phylacteries on this passage. Phylacteries are small boxes holding parchment with scriptures on them, held to the forehead or hand with leather straps. Jesus condemned abuse of the wearing of phylacteries among the Pharisees. They would make their phylactery boxes large and ostentatious as a display of greater spirituality. In the end times, there will be a satanic imitation of this practice, when the number of the Antichrist will be applied to either the hand or the forehead of all who will take it. Interesting connection there. To give you large and beautiful cities which you did not build. God planned to bring Israel into an abundant, prepared land. In this abundant blessing God had for Israel, there was an inherent danger, that they would forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall fear the Lord your God and serve him. When we do this, the idea is not of a shrinking fear from an angry God. Instead, the idea of fear is more in the concept of an awe-filled respect, and in a repulsion at the idea of offending such a great, loving God who has done so much for us. And shall take oaths in his name. Although the concept of the oath in God's name can certainly be abused, as Jesus pointed out in Matthew 5:33 through 37, there certainly is a permissible use of oaths by those who follow God, since God himself uses oaths. Here, Israel is being told you are to swear an oath only in the name of the Lord, not in the name of any other God. Yeah. I mean, you swear such an oath as when you enter into a marriage covenant, for instance. You shall not tempt the Lord your God as you tempted him at Massah. In Exodus 17:1 through 7, Israel tempted the Lord by doubting his love and concern for them. This was tempting or testing God regarding his love for Israel, something that is not only high-handed against the Lord, because we have no right to provoke the Almighty, but also disregarding his previous and constant demonstrations of love and care for Israel, by demanding that God prove his love for them now by giving them what they want. When your sons ask you in time to come, often the apostasy that comes from prosperity afflicts the next generation more than the present. They grow up expecting such prosperity and blessing without understanding the repentance and walk with God that led to that prosperity. Yeah, and I think we're seeing that now, where you have a society that was built on Christian morality, built on the self-sacrificial love that is the fuel of a good society. And you have a generation that has not learned the fear of the Lord, is expecting things to go the same way, but the society doesn't have the same fuel that propelled it to its previous heights. Then you shall say to your son, therefore it was essential for Israel to teach and warn their children, so that the blessings given to one generation would not become a curse to the next generation. Yeah. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.